Do you see a connection between Hollywood and its positive or negative influence on finding Mr. Right?
Absolutely. I think that if you look at movies, pop culture, they have had a disastrous effect on both men and women. So Plato, a long time ago in the Republic, talked about the necessity to control the arts. And I think if we think about Plato, he was pretty much a control freak. So I'm not advocating what Plato said wholesale, but he was right in the fact that he understood that if you don't guard the arts, they have the potential to socially engineer and destroy society even. So when we look at the 20th century, we can see how pop culture has had a disastrous effect on both men and women. I'm not saying that it's all bad. Obviously, there's people who put out good quality content. There's an area of taste and subjective stuff that comes into this. So it's not all or nothing, but you can definitely see over the span of many decades from the 50s, 60s, 70s, when you watch how Hollywood would insert certain messages, again, directed at men and women, you kind of get the overall impression that it was intentional. I've even studied the white papers, the kind of the NGO think tank level stuff that looked into how to engineer people to be atomized, to not have relationships, to not be able to pair bond. And the whole purpose of all that, ultimately in the big picture, was to reduce the population.
So it sounds like there's some curation that's happening a little behind the scenes. Can you give me an example of what that looks like? If I were to watch a movie about love, how might that impact a future relationship in today's society?
Yeah, it's funny you said that, because we were watching a bunch of rom-coms. I'm a heterosexual. We weren't watching rom-coms because I like penises or anything like that. We were watching rom-coms because we were analyzing them. And as a dude, I've only watched rom-coms when I'm with a girl or a date. So I haven't had a tremendous amount of across the board rom-com exposure. I've seen maybe 5. So we went deeper and deeper into these, and we were looking at patterns and consistent principles. And what you usually find is this idea that rather than making decisions based on what might be wise, a lot of times romantic comedies present the idea that that it will just happen to you. Like it's just this magical kind of fate fantasy type of thing. So I think that Hollywood had a big role in creating a fantastical notion of relationships and what they are and how they come about. And if you look at the history of the world, most relationships weren't that way. They were arranged. I'm not for arranged marriages. I'm just saying that that's how it went down for a long time. So the courtly love tradition that actually comes out of the Middle Ages. And it's kind of, again, a fantastical notion. So the first component of this kind of stuff would be just the idea that that you don't make decisions for a mate or for a spouse on the basis of what's wise or what's a long-term goal as part of the process. I mean, obviously looks and all that matters. I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but I'm just saying you have to have these bigger, higher level issues to agree upon. I would say that you're going to have trouble because you're running on a program that you were given even when you were a child. Think about Disney, right? So you probably grew up with Disney movies. I've never met a girl who didn't like Disney movies.
Disney is my favorite. Yep.
Exactly, right. So, and I'm not saying every Disney movie is bad, but if you think about one of the things that they consistently put forward is the princess, right? The princess programming. It's an intentional plan to get girls to see themselves as completely entitled. They don't have any responsibility for their actions. They're totally irresponsible. And then in turn, what that does is it kind of produces this kind of bratty, bitchy, wannabe princess girl that is not going to be attractive to a guy. And I fully admit there's programming for guys too. I understand that. But just for the girl perspective, what do you think about messages in Disney movies? Have you ever thought about that?
I have, and I do agree with you. I think there's a lot of princess mentality when it comes to, for instance, I don't know, like castles and towers and, you know, being saved and having to wait.
Yeah.
And these things. I believe, I mean, I see it all the time. I see women resorting actually to that behavior. I I think it's entertaining. I don't think it's an accurate representation of a functional relationship, because I think these days, like for instance, we live in a very expensive world. It's very complicated to live in today's society, and it's not easy to just wait around and then one day, poof, like you're married or whatever. And I would probably more likely encourage women to be and find a level of independence, instead of assume that, how do I say this? Assume that it's okay to just not do anything and just think that being pretty is it, because it's not. It shouldn't be how you define yourself. Your beauty is not like the end all be all for a relationship.
That's true, but let me give you another example. If you look at the messages that you saw with like heroes in action movies, say in the 90s, early 2000s, there's a clear shift to where the protagonist is a girl. Like literally all the action movies, all the young adult stories now, the girl is the hero who's basically doing the man's role, right? All of the traditional stories prior to everything in the 90s and 2000s, right? It was always the guy's the hero. That's the man, the man's role is to function in that way, in that archetype of the soldier, the warrior on the quest and this kind of stuff. And then it switches around that time where it's almost all predominantly now feminine heroine. The heroine is the only archetype now. And the problem with that is that, yes, there can be a level to which a woman has independence, but there still has to be a recognized authority. And I think that if you look at what a lot of Hollywood has done in the last 2 decades, it was intentionally geared towards younger adults and younger girls to make them feel like they have to take on this like superwoman mythology or whatever.
Right. Do you feel that because of that switch, it's becoming more difficult for men to find their,
So dudes have their own programming. So back in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, the programming was typically still kind of masculine, but it was like soldier programming where they wanted to prepare you to basically serve in the military, this kind of stuff. And guys were kind of being programmed with stuff that would make them a ward of the state. And they weren't being taught to be entrepreneurs. They weren't being taught to start their own businesses. They weren't being taught how to relate to women. Because you have a whole like 2 or 3 generations of dudes without dads. Like they're raised by single moms. And that was because the 60s counterculture stuff was all about, just free love, follow your passions, don't have any self-control. And what that did was it destroyed the boomers from being able to raise competent people my age, right? So there's problem upon problem in different generations, but that we have to realize that like everything is inverted. And so now it's getting so crazy that men and women don't even exist, right?
I wonder why Hollywood, just kind of looping it back to film here, why I don't see that as often, like having that unit like described as much.
Because they want to atomize society. Right? So there was a paper done by one of the most powerful think tanks back in the 70s, Stanford Research, and they talked about what techniques would be needed to atomize society so that you couldn't have families, so that you wouldn't have pair bonding. So that they have an intentional desire to do that because the overall design is to decrease the population. They don't want families. They don't want independence. They don't want people who have the ability to work on their own, to be self-sufficient. That's like the biggest, challenge to centralized collective powers like the state.
Something I remember learning is that what makes society, a good foundational society, is one of the smallest units, which is a family, and having that be successful. So why would society advocate for not having that functional unit? So I'm curious about that. It's instead created this dynamic where women need to be CEOs and be in control, right? And then men need to do the same thing, and then not be together. Where like, how does that create a more functional society? Is what I'm curious about.
It doesn't, right? I mean, if you try to instill the message in people through pop culture to just do whatever you want to do at the moment, the movies want you to, or pop culture wants you to just go for the immediate fulfillment and not think about the long term. That's one really easy way to see that it's it leads to societal breakdown, right? And that would apply to relationships as well, right? I'm not going to exercise self-control. I'm just going to sleep with whoever, right? And then I'll, you know, when I'm 30, 40, then maybe I'll settle down. But you realize as you get older, you pay a toll for that. Like if you've slept with a lot of people, it doesn't matter whether you're a guy or girl, you're going to pay a toll for that. And you pay more of a toll. Well, it's not fair, but if you're a girl and you sleep with 1 million people, right? It's a lot more of a toll to pay because it's harder to find a guy who really wants to lock down with somebody like that. Have you watched Sex and the City? Because you were talking about, you know, these kinds of pop culture celebrity shows. I think Sex and the City was a big one geared towards women to kind of like make them, you know, undesirable actually as a mate.
Oh, interesting. So I have not watched Sex in the City, and I think every girl would kill me. I have not watched it either. I have watched some like a spin-off of it, and I think it was called Carrie Bradshaw, or like Carrie in something about some girl named Carrie, and she was indulged in this New York life and this New York sort of job, and meeting this guy and having these mysterious endeavors and things like that.
Right. Rootless cosmopolitanism is basically what that you could refer to that as, where you don't build something lasting. It's just, you know, one pleasurable experience to the next, which is basically diminishes the pleasure over time. So if you know, it's just like anything, like if you're an addict to something, you know, you lose the joy of the thing that you're addicted to, and it just becomes kind of an addiction. And the same thing can happen, not just with, I don't just mean sexuality, but I mean the high of like, you know, constantly going through people and dating, you know, that addiction can be something that you never find fulfillment in.
Right. Overdoing it, it's not actually feminine. It's not leveling up anymore. It's you're not contributing to yourself leveling up, is how I think they would define that. That is very interesting.
It's an imbalance, right? Like if you're overly focused on you know, material possessions, it is self-defeating. It's just like being imbalanced and overly focused on any of the other things, right? If you've had too much sex, you've slept with everybody, then you're going to be less appealing as a mate because it won't be as unique to you and that person, right? It's just another person that you're sleeping with. And that whole message of like, just seize it right now, do what you want, just do it. That is one easy way to see that pop culture just tells you to do what thou wilt, right? As Aleister Crowley said, the famous Satanist. I mean, Brave New World kind of paints this image. It's the novel
I love that book, Brave New World.
Yeah, I mean, it tries to explain where we're going, and that's not an expose, it's actually a plan. Like he wrote that and said, this is what we're going to bring about. So, you know, we're going to have weird stuff like cyborg rights, and people will have, you know, body mods, and it's going to be very weird. It won't be appealing. It won't be natural. It'll be unnatural. So we have to get in tune with what is natural, or else we will be in a bad place.
Classic films. I did used to watch those black and white films. One was almost called like Some Like It Hot, and that's
a good one. Yeah.
Wait, you know it?
Yeah, I know a lot of old movies. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I really like that. It kind of has this, male to female sort of exploration. I'm the kind of person that if I find one thing that I like, I obnoxiously watch it over and over again. So I watched Some Like It Hot at least 6 times.
Yeah. Watch Philadelphia Story, because that one deals with like commitment. It deals with problems that people are going to encounter. And then Cary Grant is basically realizing that he messed up, and his first girl was the one that was the best girl. So the whole movie is premised on 3 different guys basically going for the girl that he initially wants to get back. So he basically arranges this elaborate sort of plot to get her back. And the reason I like that is just that it's wholesome, because it was at a period when Hollywood wasn't promoting divorce and degeneracy. It was promoting commitment. And I was hearing a statistic the other day that something like at any point in time in the modern world, 40 to 60% of all adults are single, which is weird, because in the 40s and 50s, it would be totally the other way around, right? Maybe 10, 20% were single. Yeah. So we have this weird inversion to where the norm is now what was always in the rest of history, not the norm.
It makes me want to conclude that non-committal non-committal behavior is what sells in America, is what I'm assuming.
Ever seen that movie with Matthew McConaughey called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? Played by Matthew.
So every girl has seen that, surely, right?
Wait, what's the name of the movie again?
How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Yes, I've seen that one.
Okay. So even though that's a cheesy romantic comedy, the message is actually wholesome because both of them are career obsessed.
They are.
And they put that first. And then what happens is that, as you know, in the end, she kind of caves in and decides that she wants to be with him. So, I mean, that's not really a very feminist film, and I don't think it would be made today.